Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sonia.
Today we're talking about spring hosting, which both you and I do a lot of.
I wore my party dress because I'm ready. I'm ready to start. I'm ready to start hosting. I'm ready to start gathering people together and feeding them. This time of year when you're ready to kind of come out of your sweats and your hot chocolate and you're ready to eat something green and gather some people around. And there's also so many great holidays coming up.
I love that you're wearing a floral dress. It's beautiful. And for those who are wondering about this visual image, we actually do release all of our podcast episodes on YouTube, so you can find us there. So for me, spring hosting really coincides with Passover every year. The Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, so the dates shift based on what's happening in the lunar calendar, but Passover typically falls in April. And Passover is a tricky holiday to host. I think it's actually one of the hardest holidays of the year to host. There's a lot of components. There's a lot of dishes. It's typically a multi-course meal. And so you and I both talked about the framework for spring hosting, that we're each going to share a starter, a salad, a main dish, a side, and a dessert, and real menus that we would serve as hosts, whether it's for a holiday or just a dinner party.
I've catered many Passover meals as well, and I would completely agree with you. There are so many components, and I actually found that was one of the most heavy catering jobs I would do every year. There's so much to think about, and so I think we're going to start kind of with the biggest one, and then we'll kind of work our way to more casual gatherings that don't have quite as many elements in them.
Or expectations, maybe.
Expectations.
And also the other thing to note about Passover is typically you don't eat bread, depending whether you're Ashkenazi Jewish or Sephardi Jewish, depending on your background or on your level of practice, you might observe it differently. But I'm thinking about a menu that doesn't contain any wheat or grains. I am going to start, though, with talking about one of my favorite Passover traditions, which is chopped liver. This is like a classic Passover starter that is not for everyone. And what I actually love even more than traditional chopped liver is vegan chopped liver or vegetarian chopped liver. You can make it either way. Have you ever had it?
First of all, I do not like liver. This is one of those moments where I'm going to throw down. Like, I just don't love liver. And
sure.
But I'm so curious about vegan or vegetarian liver. What is it even made of?
So the vegan chopped liver, I'm asterisk for observant Jews. This recipe that I love has lentils, so certain Jewish communities won't eat lentils on Passover, but I really like this at any time. The recipe writer is Allie Miller. I had to photograph this recipe once, so that's why I made it. It's up on the Nosher. We'll link it in the show notes. But it has lentils, onions, mushrooms, miso paste, dried tarragon. There's maybe some vinegar, some wine. And basically you're cooking up your mushrooms and onions and getting them all caramelized. And then you're taking cooked lentils and you're pureeing that, chopping that up in a blender. And it's like a pate, like a mushroom pate, which if I call it mushroom pate, does that sound more appealing to you, Carrie?
I mean, what you just described, I'm 100% in for. I love lentils, mushrooms, onions, tarragon. I love all these flavors, and I love a dip. This is essentially a dip you spread on.
This is a dip.
I'm guessing you're spreading this onto a crunchy piece of matzah, and I'm super into that. I love that idea.
It's a savory umami starter. It really sort of gets your appetite going. And if you are an observant person at Passover, there's a version that's vegetarian that's onion, mushroom, egg, walnuts. It's the same idea. You caramelize your onions, you caramelize your mushrooms, you hard boil your eggs, you pulse that all together in a food processor with walnuts. And that also is another version. Okay, so that's my starter this year. Then I cannot have a Passover without a great, vibrant salad. And I usually serve that as a starter course too, alongside some smoked fish or any kind of fish that's traditional at Passover. This year, I'm thinking about this beautiful recipe I found for an asparagus, snap pea, radish salad with lots of herbs. And what I love about the salad is you blanch the asparagus and snap peas so they're just lightly cooked, and then you toss them with shaved radish and tons of parsley, tons of dill, which you know I love. And I would actually add mint to this, and then it's a very simple lemony, mustardy vinaigrette. And what I love most is you can make this ahead of time because those vegetables are blanched. It can sit in your fridge. You could probably make it the day before and it will be just as delicious.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine what all those flavors taste like, but what I'm imagining is what this salad looks like, which is green with hot pink radish.
It's so delicious. And you could do watermelon radish for this, which is a little less spicy, a little sweeter, and also very beautiful. I also feel like you don't have to follow this recipe exactly as written. The idea will always be the same. Snap peas sweet, asparagus sweet, little crunchy radish. Skip the radish if you hate radish.
Yeah,
just
or
keep
skip the mint
herbs.
that you don't like. One of my friends who listens to us very regularly, she does not like you talking about dill all the time.
Well, I'm so sorry.
She doesn't like dill and she doesn't like parsley. So in that case, you could use basil. You could use a little tarragon.
You could skip the herbs, by the way, millions of Slavic people strongly disagree with the hatred of dill. And I'm here to honor my roots and those people that love it. And also, if it's not your thing, skip it.
I love the dill too. I love the parsley. I love the mint. I think that it really speaks of the flavors of spring. So I love that. And I love that you can make this ahead of time.
Use chives. Use nothing at all and make it ahead so you can save yourself time when you're hosting. I'm always looking for make ahead moments, which leads into my next dish. So a brisket is obviously a traditional Passover food. I'm going to link to a really wonderful horseradish braised brisket from Alison Roman, but I want to talk about a non-beef dish because sometimes people at my table aren't eating beef, or I want something lighter, or beef can be really expensive right now. So I'm also thinking about what are the other options for hosting. And just the other week, I made something for a small dinner party, which is a recipe I'd made years ago and came back to. And it's a charred chicken and blood orange with sweet potato dish. It all comes together in one cast iron pan or one Dutch oven. And basically you're taking bone-in chicken thighs, you're browning them on each side, and then you're cooking them in just a little bit of liquid or stock with sweet potatoes and I believe onions and garlic. And so it's a braise. It's like you pop that in the oven, you let the sweet potatoes and the chicken all cook through, and then you kind of lightly saute some blood orange slices, and you could use regular orange if you can't find blood orange anymore. And then you top the dish with these rounds of just lightly sauteed blood orange. It's so stunning to me. It's such a perfect hosting dish, and you could make it the day before.
Right.
You can totally make this ahead because it's a braise. It's not going to suffer from being reheated. It only gets more flavorful. I also love that the sweet potatoes are part of the dish and cook in that chicken fat and make that even more delicious.
Yeah, and I also love that it's very seasonal. And again, if you can't find the blood oranges, you could easily use the regular navel orange or look for a pink cara.
Yeah. And you could really skip the orange if you hate orange and just do chicken and sweet potatoes. The recipe really works well. So the side dish I'm thinking about, because I really like to have a hearty vegetable side, especially if I'm not making a separate vegetarian dish. There's this Andy Bargani recipe. He's a famous food writer. He was a contributor to Bon Appetit. He has his own cookbook. And he had this recipe in Bon Appetit magazine that I discovered thanks to my friends, Greg and Jordan, who are incredible hosts. They just make the most beautiful dinner parties, and they swear by this fall apart caramelized cabbage.
Ooh.
Now,
We love cabbage.
We love cabbage, and I love a caramelized cabbage dish. I've certainly made them many times, but this recipe really stands out, and it's just those subtle details. So he treats it kind of like a braise, where you take wedges of cabbage and you sear them and brown them, and then you take them out of the pan. And to that pan, you're adding tomato paste, coriander, chili flake, and sort of a little bit of liquid. And that creates your braising sauce. And then you put the cabbage wedges back into the pan and you pop that in the oven for 40 or 50 minutes. And so I love this again because you can make it kind of in advance and just keep it warm
or just
lightly
reheat it.
reheat
Yeah,
it.
yeah. This reminds me a little bit of your braised leeks. But then when you went into the tomato paste and coriander, I was like, wow, that's a right turn that I wasn't expecting. Those are big flavors, but I feel like that would be great for something like cabbage.
Yeah, and it becomes so tender and meltingly soft. And then I'm ending my Passover meal with This year I was like, okay, I make a lot of chocolate desserts every year, and I'll probably have matzo toffee somewhere on my table, which is a chocolate covered matzo basically. So I wanted something fruity and lighter. And there's this recipe from Smitten Kitchen for an almond cake that gets topped with a strawberry rhubarb compote. And in the description of the recipe, you can make it either with regular flour if you're not keeping Passover and want to eat grains and whatever. But she tries it with matzah meal or matzah cake meal. So and I think this would work with almond flour too, frankly. And it works as written with just that swap. It's very Passover friendly. And instead of butter, you could use non-dairy butter. And then this sort of almondy cake, then topped with the seasonal rhubarb and strawberry that you're just cooking down in a little sugar. That to me, like that fruity bite at the end of a heavy meal is really welcome for me personally.
Well, and I just love the idea of an almondy cake that's both light and has some richness to it. Sounds really, really delicious. And wouldn't it also be gluten-free?
For this recipe, the matzo meal wouldn't be gluten-free, but you could easily do a gluten-free flour. Also, there's a great almond cake that uses no flour at all that I'll link to that I make for Passover sometime. A flourless almond cake or gluten-free almond cake is such a nice spring dessert.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Sonia, I have been thinking about the Easter meals that we had when I was growing up. And I've shared on our podcast a couple of times that both my dad and my grandfather would make a ham. And we always had ham on our table for Easter dinner. And it's about this time of year that I also start to kind of feel like I'm ready for a ham. So I came up with this really great menu that is very Midwestern in its roots, but it has a couple of modern twists. But one thing we would often have on our table was deviled eggs. And then we would have a ham with a soft dinner roll. That's kind of a must with any Midwestern meal is you have these dinner rolls. A creamy scalloped potato. Midwesterners love a potato dish, like a potato in a casserole. And we would often have this spinach salad with fresh strawberries and poppy seed dressing. For dessert, I have a couple of cake options. So I'm going to sort of talk us through them. You could make your standard deviled egg recipe if you want. There's actually this really great deviled egg recipe called Parsi deviled eggs. And the secret ingredient in them is a little bit of honey. So
what does Parsi mean?
Well, it's interesting. The recipe has this sort of funny history about it. They're called Parsi deviled eggs, and the recipe is by Nilofer Ichaporia King. I think I've gotten that right. And she found the recipe in a cookbook that was published in India. And the recipe was called Italian eggs, but the eggs are not Italian at all because it's fresh lime juice, honey, jalapeno, cilantro, and a little bit of mayo for creaminess. So you boil your eggs, you cut them in half, you scoop out the yolks, and you mix those with this fresh lime and a little bit of honey, cilantro, a little bit of jalapeno. If you like it spicier, you could add more jalapeno. And what's interesting is this recipe came from my favorite cookbook, which I've talked about several times, the 150 Best American Recipes. But you and I really like to be able to link recipes. And so I went online to see if someone had published it. And actually, Samin Nosrat published it and sort of tells the story of how she herself did not grow up eating deviled eggs. And she was like, this is the most incredible deviled egg recipe.
That is such high
praise
from Samin Nosrat.
Yeah, but also this book is curated recipes and they pulled this.
It's vetted.
Yeah, it's vetted.
It's like what they're including, they really believe in. I love a deviled egg, and I love a deviled egg to start a meal. And in fact, when you and I did a pop-up years ago together dinner, we started with those porcini deviled eggs as one of our starters.
Oh my gosh, I remember we should put a picture of the presentation of that too, because it was really pretty.
It was cute.
Yeah, it was like a nest. Yeah. It was like a nest of all these herbs. It was certainly where when I was growing up, people loved deviled eggs, but this is a really fun and interesting way to do them that, by all measures, people really like. So, I've talked about my dad used to cook a bone-in ham. I'm going to include a couple of easy recipes. I actually found this really great carving video too. So I would recommend if someone wants to do a bone-in ham, there's a couple of recipes. We also used to always have soft dinner rolls at our table. The dinner rolls that we always had, they would hold their shape. You could sort of tear them apart and spread some butter on them, but we would always try to make twice as many so that we could have like ham sandwiches when, for the next day. And our like local grocery store would make them, but I also found a recipe online. It's like a pretty easy dinner roll recipe, and you can make it ahead of time and reheat them. And
I just made dinner rolls this week.
You did?
Actually, I did. I happened to make them this week because I was teaching a class about borscht and pampushki. Pampushki are garlic rolls. They're Ukrainian garlic rolls. But what I found is the rolls themselves really benefit from milk as the liquid instead of water. And it makes them so tender. And like they stay tender. The dough is so supple. If you've never made a homemade roll, it's worth it just to feel that dough.
Yeah, it really is. I do love the milk in these. It's worth making them. And I would also just shout out the pampushki from your cookbook, that picture of them. It makes me salivate every time I look at it.
Well, thank you.
And then one of the dishes from my childhood for sure, and I think a lot of Midwesterners always have like a scalloped potato, which are also called potatoes au gratin. The recipe that I'm sharing is a little bit of an update from some of the dishes that I had when I was growing up. It felt kind of one note, like it just has a lot of cream in it. What I like about this recipe is she really recommends that you use a Yukon Gold, which instead of a russet will hold its shape better, more bite to the potato. And you make a roux with butter and you cook some flour into it, but then you thicken it with both vegetable broth and milk.
Oh, so it's loose. So it's not as like
heavy. It's not as heavy, and there's a little bit of garlic and there's a little bit of fresh thyme. Not flavors I grew up with.
No, but the thyme is going to make all that difference.
The thyme is going to make the difference, but it has some onion in it too. So there's like onions, garlic, vegetable broth, thyme, and I think there's something that just elevates the potatoes. It actually makes the potatoes taste better. And what's great about a scalloped potato dish is that you can make it ahead of time, make it a couple of days ahead of time, reheat it, take it with you if you're going to someone's potluck. And so this is another thing that we would always have on our table for sure.
My husband, Jonathan, loves a scalloped potato. He would be right at your table for this meal. This sounds incredible.
And in the Midwest, you're kind of conjuring spring around Easter. It's like you're really hoping for it.
Still really cold.
And we would often see a spinach salad with strawberries and a poppy seed dressing. And what's great about this is that by Easter in California, we have incredible strawberries. That was definitely not the case in the Midwest. So this recipe, the dressing is a little bit sweet. There's a little bit of sugar, along with a little bit of shallot and champagne vinegar. And even if you don't have the sweetest strawberries, this is a great way to use those first spring strawberries.
So for most of the poppy seed dressings I've ever had or made have like a creamy element to it, right? Is this where you add mayonnaise?
A teaspoon or two of mayonnaise.
Right. It's a hint of creaminess.
It's a hint.
It's really not, it's more vinegary.
Yeah, it's more vinegary. And I never would have seen goat cheese on the table that I was growing up on, but I think that goat cheese is really nice in this salad. And I think if you wanted to add something like arugula, which adds like a spicy element, you could cut that baby spinach. You really want baby spinach here because you want it to be really tender, but I think arugula would be really nice here too.
I love a poppy seed dressing.
I love too.
Okay, well, what are you having for dessert?
Okay, have you ever heard of a hummingbird cake?
I have not.
Okay, if you're a baker, which I'm generally not, but you're looking for a show-stopping cake, the hummingbird cake is very show-stopping. So it's a 3-layer cake. It's very similar to a carrot cake, but the flavor notes are more of like ripe banana and crushed pineapple, along with all those sort of similar spiced notes of cinnamon and allspice. You could add a little bit of ginger. And then there's like a cream cheese buttercream and toasted pecans. And I found this recipe on Sally's Baking Addiction, her website. And she's been developing recipes for a really long time. And she sort of tells the story of going to like a baby shower or a bridal shower and tasting this cake and just taking like a tiny slice. And then she was like, that ended up with a big slice and a moment to herself in the corner. It's kind of like carrot cake, but better in a way, I think is the way she described it.
And I think carrot cake and carrot cake adjacent desserts really scream spring and the Easter table. And carrots are also so good in spring. It makes so much sense to me to have these flavor profiles at your spring table.
Yeah, exactly. And carrot cake is such a spring cake anyway. And my mother-in-law she was not a cook at all, but she was known for her carrot cake, and she used a carrot dump cake. So I was kind of looking at these recipes where you just kind of dump carrots in with, she used carrots and crushed pineapple, and I know she used raisins in hers, but I couldn't find any raisin recipes that looked good to me. But I think if you wanted to do something like that, like, you use a box mix and kind of doctor it up with some of these fresh elements, and she would usually serve hers in like a Pyrex, in a casserole topped with the cream cheese frosting, and that's a lot easier if you didn't want to bake a 3-layer cake that took you a couple of days.
That's such a good point. I mean, yeah, it depends on what kind of host you want to be. Some people really want to go all out for these holidays, and that's the time to shine. I sometimes am in the mood for that, but sometimes I'm not even in the mood to make that much effort, and I want to rely on easier dishes. So I like that there's this combination of both being offered, and even in your menu itself, a bone-in ham is pretty simple to make. A salad is pretty simple to make. And then so if you make like scalloped potatoes, which could be a little bit more work, you're balancing out the workload with the menu.
Yeah, and you're doing what I think we also like to talk about when we're talking about hosting with each other is you're timing things out. 3 days ahead, you can do this dish. 2 days ahead, you can make your dressing. My dad will make the ham 3 days ahead and just reheat it. So if you really love to make a big cake like this or a special dish, you can carve out time to do that.
Exactly. So Carrie, I was thinking about another spring menu that was just more inspired by where I am, which is the Pacific Northwest. What is growing here? What symbolizes the Pacific Northwest? What do we get excited about? So for this spring hosting menu, which could be served for a holiday or not, I would start with stuffed mushrooms, which I want to circle back to in a minute. My mom always made stuffed mushrooms, and I just think mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest are so intrinsically linked. For my salad course, I'm going to serve something you wouldn't like, but I really think is a wonderful recipe. It's this beet slaw that uses pistachio butter, and it's from the cookbook 6 Seasons. 6 Seasons is written by a really prominent local Northwest chef. For the main, I'm going to do a pomegranate lacquered salmon, a recipe from Adina Sussman. And then for a side, I'm going to use asparagus throughout the season. Anytime there's asparagus for 2 months straight, I'm making it every week. So there's this wonderful roasted asparagus with buttery almonds and capers from Yotamo Telengi that I want to make. And then finishing the meal with a 1-layer strawberry cake. And to just offer a little more detail, so stuffed mushrooms are just a classic, almost feels like an 80s recipe, and definitely
feels very 80s
something
to me,
again,
I guess.
right?
Yeah.
But every time I have them, I'm like, why am I not making this more often? And I'm going to link 2 different recipes. One, which is the classic stuffed mushroom, where you chop up mushrooms and their stems and you add cheese, you fill your mushrooms, you top it with breadcrumbs and Parmesan, and you put that in the oven. That's one version. I also found this version that was simplifying it a little and using Boursin cheese as the main part of the filling.
I love a Boursin.
Right? We love a Boursin.
So much flavor, so little effort.
So easy. I'm loving a stuffed mushroom as a starter. I'm okay with it being old school. Why not? And then this beet slaw, what is really interesting about it. So beets taste different at different times of year. And in spring, they can be really small and tender and not quite as sweet as winter beets. And so what he recommends you do is you have this kind of beet slaw that's dressed in garlic and mint and parsley, and there's raisins that you soak in vinegar. So there's like the sweetness of the beets and then the acidity of this dressing that then infuses these raisins. And then he teaches you how to make a homemade pistachio butter, which is just blending pistachios essentially in a food processor. It's not complicated. And recommends a swath of pistachio butter, then the beet salad on top. This is totally an extra over-the-top salad.
This is so chefy.
And that's the cookbook. The cookbook is very chefy. But what he does with vegetables is brilliant. And I just think if you are a vegetable lover, 6 Seasons is one of my favorite cookbooks for that. And I just think this is a combination of flavors and textures I wouldn't have come up with on my own.
Well, I'll just offer, yes, the putting together of this salad is chefy, but often when you look at recipes like this, All the steps are very simple. It's just that when you pile them all together, it does take some time. But I think we're talking about hosting, and hosting is worth adding in a little bit more time.
And so that's almost like the most complicated recipe if you think about it, because the pomegranate lacquered salmon, that would be the main, you're making the easiest glaze. It's pomegranate molasses, date syrup, and some spices.
Wow.
It's very few ingredients. And the only thing with this dish is this is the one thing you would sort of make on the day as opposed to ahead. Other things you can make ahead. And you're glazing your salmon every 5 minutes at 350 as it cooks. So it really develops the glaze. And you could even serve the salmon a little bit reheated and finish it off with extra glaze right before serving. So I love that, just that tartness of the pomegranate molasses with the sweetness of the date syrup, or you could use brown sugar if you didn't have date syrup. Just that sweet tart glaze on a salmon, I think, can even convert a non-salmon lover because it adds so much flavor. And then Adina Sussman recommends that you serve it on a bed of endives, which I really love. That red and then green and then the lacquered salmon. I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, and with your asparagus side, it's like this really beautifully colored salmon, and then with this like shock of asparagus green. I'm just visualizing your table. It's so pretty.
Yeah, all these
Yes.
colors, right? The purples, the greens, the everything. And then you get the bright green roasted asparagus. And this is another really simple dish. Tossing your asparagus in oil, roasting in the oven. Then you get out a pan, you melt some butter, you toast some almonds, and then you also fry up your capers in that butter. So then you're topping your asparagus with this melted butter, toasted almond caper topping. Very, very simple. Takes just a few minutes to make. That's stunning. That has nuttiness, richness, and a little bit of tang, which asparagus really loves.
There's a lot of simplicity in this menu. You can make it sound really fancy, but it's actually pretty simple.
Yeah, it's what are those little chefy
Yes.
secrets that make things sound special, but don't take tremendous amount of skill or work. And that is a good segue to my dessert. So during strawberry season, I want my strawberries fresh. I just want to get the most of them. So I love any kind of shortcake or strawberry and whipped cream. That's what I want to eat. And Sally's Baking Addiction has this great 1-layer strawberry cake recipe where you make that perfect kind of homemade white cake and in 1 layer. And you could use box mix if you didn't want to make your own cake. But I do think her recipe is pretty straightforward and easy. Then you whip up some cream, you have some strawberries separately, you add a little strawberry jam and a little sugar just to make it kind of syrupy and saucy, but you're not really adding too much of either. It's really highlighting the fruit. I would add a little like passion fruit curd or passion fruit juice or passion fruit jam if I could, because I love that with strawberry, but strawberry jam really works. And then you're just layering your sheet of cake when you're ready to serve with whipped cream and those juicy strawberries that you coated in that basically sauce. And you just pile that on right before serving. So you can make your cake ahead of time the day before. And then you can make your whipped cream and your strawberries a little earlier before dinner. And then you're just putting it all together as you stick it on the table. And to me, that's a perfect springtime dessert.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm also thinking about serving in front of everyone. I feel like the presentation of that would be really beautiful.
So Carrie, what's your last spring menu?
So my last spring menu is also inspired by my days as a personal chef. My menu is actually very seasonal to California, and it really kind of calls back to a lot of the menus that I would build for clients. Mine really starts off with the fanciest piece, and then everything else is pretty simple from there. So I'm starting off with smoked salmon rolls with arugula, mascarpone, chives, and capers. And I will talk us through the recipe once I get through the menu. And then I'm going to roast some chicken thighs that have been marinated in a little bit of fresh lemon juice and olive oil. Very, very simple, with some herbs, and serve that with baby roast potatoes and more fresh herbs. So it's like very, very springy. And a side salad of crunchy fennel with pecorino and olive oil. Like, keep it very, very simple. And then my dessert is also a little bit chefy, but it actually only takes 5 minutes. It's a grapefruit posset, which is basically like a panna cotta. So I'm going to go back and talk us through the smoked salmon rolls. And again, I found this recipe in the 150 Best American Recipes, but it's also online on the Food Network. And it's a really elegant appetizer. And you just take mascarpone cheese, which you buy at the grocery store. You mix it with capers, chives, lemon juice, salt, and pepper. Just make this like flavorful, filling. And you take pieces of like really thin pieces of smoked salmon, lay them out on your cutting board, add a little bit, like a little spoonful of this cheese mixture, and then take a couple of pieces of arugula, like a couple of fresh pieces of arugula. This is where you want to use like a baby arugula that's really small and tender, and lay that in the middle and then roll it up so that the arugula kind of peeks out the top. And so then you have these like beautiful pieces of like orange smoked salmon with the arugula coming out of the top. And what you really want to do is you want to position them so that they are standing up like a little soldier.
The arugula, like, so you're rolling it up and those little pieces of arugula stand up.
They stand up like in the center. And you can do this ahead of time, like earlier in the day, and put it on a pretty platter and then bring it out right before you're getting ready to serve. But one of the suggestions that they also make is that you can make this with a salad too. So if you were to dress some baby greens, like very, very simply with like lemon and olive oil, and then just serve these little pieces of smoked salmon with the arugula and the middle filling, which is very, it's like capery and chivy, and all those flavors go really well together, and they're so springy. And then I did a lemony chicken thigh because chicken thighs are very, very forgiving. This is a dish that you can make ahead of time. And I found a video that Sarah Carey did for Martha Stewart, and she really kind of talks through every step. And I think the brilliance is actually in the simplicity of it, like fresh lemon juice, great olive oil, salt and pepper, really well salt and peppered. Let your chicken thighs sit for a while. And then before you roast them, what you want to do is like slick some olive oil in your pan, your roasting pan, and turn your chicken thighs like skin side down so they get really crisp. So they cook that way. And then at the very end, you want to broil them so that you get that really great color. And again, you can do this earlier in the day and let it sit and reheat it before your guests come. My biggest tip is roast your baby potatoes with both olive oil and butter, because the olive oil will help it not stick to the bottom of the pan, and the butter adds a lot of flavor. I would do this a lot for Passover. I would make it earlier in the day and let that sit out, and then I would chop a bunch of very fresh tender herbs like chives and tarragon and dill. I would add a lot of dill, parsley. I chop those, I leave those to the side, and then reheat right before you get ready to serve, and then just put that flurry of herbs on, and it makes them so pretty, especially if you can find those potatoes that are the white potatoes and the red potatoes.
The little mixed fingerlings or baby potatoes. And I think the story that's emerging in all these menus is fresh herbs are going to make a huge difference.
I'm really glad that you said that, especially in the spring. You're really highlighting all the brightness of the season. And I also wanted to offer a crunchy fennel salad. I always found that as a chef, when I would make the simplest things that literally were not a recipe, people would pull me aside and they're like, what is this? It's shaved fennel, tossed with a little bit of really good olive oil. This is where you want to use your fruitiest, most extra virgin, beautiful olive oil, salt and pepper, and then shavings of pecorino cheese, which is like a very salty cheese. Given the roasted chicken and the baby potatoes, having something that's very crunchy on the side, that's such a great plate, right?
Yes, I love a fennel salad. I love a little citrus in there, or I love it like the way you described with a sharp cheese.
And also in the spring, the fennel is so tender. And this is a time also to take those fronds and use those as garnish on top of your salad. I think the simplicity is actually also really nice. People love that.
I do too.
And then finally, there's this grapefruit posset, which I saw on Zoe Francois' newsletter a few weeks ago. And I personally love grapefruit. And this is also like such a perfect time in California. There's so many different kinds of grapefruit. What's amazing about this is it actually just takes 5 minutes to make. And it's basically a panna cotta, but you don't use gelatin. So it's just heavy cream and sugar and a vanilla bean. And you kind of just let that simmer very barely for about 5 minutes. And then you take it off the heat. You add fresh grapefruit juice and grapefruit zest. And then let that cool for, I guess, another like 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then you strain that into really pretty glasses. If you had like a nice shot glass or a crystal or even just a ramekin, strain that in, put it in your fridge. it sets up over a few hours. You could also make this the day ahead. And if you're not a grapefruit fan, this also works brilliantly with like lemon, if you have fresh lemons, or if you had limes. What I love about Zoe's recipe is that she serves it with frozen dragon fruit, which is that shock.
Oh, so pretty.
That shock of hot pink. As it thaws, it kind of creates this little sauce. And so it's just this really beautiful presentation. But also if you wanted to make like a lemon or a lime version, a lemon posset with some raspberries and a little bit of zest and mint, that's a great dessert.
It is actually perfect for a Passover menu. If you need a dessert during the holiday that could come together really quickly, like you said, like in 5 minutes, that involves no grains, that is just citrus and some dairy and a little sugar. I love it. It sounds light and refreshing. And particularly after a heavy meal, I feel like this would be the perfect citrusy end note.
Yeah, like a creamy bite with a little bit of fruit. It's a great way to end a meal.
This has made me extremely hungry and also very excited to start hosting.
Yeah, I'm ready to party.
Well, until next
Until
time.
next time, bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.